Hello, everyone, and welcome to the session today on understanding your supply chain risks. We'll start right on time because we've got a lot to get through today in 30 minutes. And this is the first in a three-part series on supply chains, so make sure you dial into the next two sessions coming up over the next 2 weeks. My name is Matt Sprague. I'm the Deputy Director of Climate Advisory for APAC here at South Pole, and I'll be your host for the day. On average, Scope 3 emissions, which include your supply chain, are around 11 times higher than operational emissions. And the importance of supply chains was also highlighted during the COVID pandemic, impacting the costs of goods around the world. So we know that supply chains are becoming increasingly complex and increasingly pivotal for companies to achieve their climate ambitions. In the next 30 minutes, we will cover how to understand the climate risks your supply chain is exposed to, and how to support your key suppliers to address these risks. At the end, we will try and answer as many questions as we can, but if we're not able to answer your questions today, we will respond after the session. Moving on to a little bit of housekeeping. Thanks, Louisa. You are all muted and will be for the duration of the session, but please do post any questions that you have in the Q&A box, and we'll answer some of these during the session and some at the end and respond to any that we don't get to. Everyone will receive a recording of today's session along with a document containing all the questions and answers, so keep an eye out for the post-session email. Joining me today is my South Pole colleague and climate risk expert, Louisa Fisher, as well as Ivon Flores, Head of Sustainability and CSR at JG Summit. Louisa, Ivon, thank you for your time today. And Louisa, I'd like to start with you to talk about climate risks.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Matt. So let's get straight into it. What is climate-related risks and why would you want to understand this? So climate risk is categorized into two different types. There are physical risks. So those are risks basically of loss due to the physical impact of climate change on an organization's operations or supply chain. And these would be stemming from physical events, so things like heat waves or droughts, or bushfires, etc., that might be changing in terms of their intensity or frequency in light of climate change. And the other type of climate-related risk that we have are transition risks. So these are basically a risk of loss due to changes in business fundamentals created by the transition to a low carbon economy. So these are things that stem from, say, policy changes, legal risks, new technologies, market changes, reputational damage. So these are, an example for these is, for instance, carbon pricing mechanisms, so a carbon tax or a carbon cap and trade system. There are mechanisms to incentivize businesses to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions and find the most cost-effective ways to do this. I'd also like to point out that there are opportunities around climate risks as well. So less so from the physical risk side, but for instance, you could have wind characteristics that may change to be more favorable for wind power production in certain areas. So that would be relevant for a wind power producer. And then from transition risks, an opportunity could be investing in low carbon products and processes now, which may place the company in a better position in the future. Now, let's think about what climate risk would look like specifically at a global supply chain. So I have a fictional company here, so it's a clothing and a coffee manufacturer with a global supply chain, and I'm going to start sort of from the start of things. So sourcing the raw material. You could have drought that is affecting the cotton yield in Pakistan and India, and you could have heat and changes in rainfall patterns that are affecting the coffee yields in Central and South America. So what happens if your yield is affected? This might mean that the suppliers that you typically engage with cannot supply what you typically buy from them. So you need to source elsewhere. So this could be sourcing from other suppliers or sourcing from the open market. Now, considering that the yield of your usual suppliers has been affected, this indicates that there could also be an effect generally on those raw products. So just cotton in general or coffee in general. So that would not only make it more expensive because you're going to the open market, but it might also be affecting the open market price for these raw products, making it even more expensive. If we then move to the thought of, well, where are your processing sites? So there could be heat waves that are affecting Chinese factories, so affecting the worker productivity and requiring a shift to nighttime work. So this could cause delays, but it could also cause extra costs because paying the workers to work during the night is typically more expensive than if they were to work during the day. You could also have processing sites being affected by tropical cyclones and flooding, which could damage factories in Southeast Asia, for instance. So there you have the damages to the factories itself, so that is a cost, but you also particularly, especially if you don't necessarily own those factories, there could be delays, mainly because there would be downtime in the processing of the raw product that you need for your business. If we then think about transport and storage, so that's the next stage, you could have drought affecting the Panama Canal operations, which would lead to transport disruptions and cause significant delays in transport around the world. Or you could also have heavy snow that damages warehouses, for example, caving in their roofs and blocking roads in Europe. Again, leading to delays or even losses in terms of product. If we then think more sort of around some of the other suppliers, you could think about low carbon products and services that are unavailable because of the high demand. So that could be packaging for the coffee or the clothing. And you could have heat waves that are creating power outages for suppliers and consumers in North America. And at the same time, you could be dealing with stakeholder litigation around an employer's duty to provide a safe workplace for their employees, including minimizing climate change impacts. And all of that sits in the light of the fact that legislation of carbon pricing is increasing business costs globally. So here there's a few ideas of how a global supply chain could be affected. Now, why should my business care about understanding, managing, and disclosing climate-related risks? I think the previous slide sort of already gives a first sense for that, but generally it really comes down to 2 points. It comes down to compliance and to climate resilience. So if we're talking about compliance, it's basically complying with regulations. So globally, climate regulation is changing fast, and addressing risk prevents penalties, reputational damage, and legal liabilities now and also in the future. Meeting stakeholder expectations is another point. So this is employees, customers, investors, and other stakeholders that are increasingly expecting companies to adopt sustainable practices and choosing who they do business with accordingly. And then, of course, you create business resilience. So addressing climate risks like extreme weather and resource scarcity is crucial for long-term resilience, especially in the supply chain. And you can identify new opportunities. So addressing climate risk creates a platform for product, service, and supply chain innovation, and opens up new markets through differentiation compared to your competitors. Now, if we think about the compliance part and we think about sort of where we're located in, I just wanted to give a short highlight on what this looks like in the Asia Pacific region. So Asia Pacific is seeing an increase in climate disclosure requirements in line with the TCFD and ISSB frameworks. So they're currently driven either by legislation, such as in Australia and New Zealand, or by the stock exchange requirements around listed companies. Examples of that would be Japan, Singapore, and Malaysia. Now, great. You've seen what the reasons are why you would want to look at this, but the question is now, well, how do I actually assess and manage climate-related risks? And there's 4 steps to this. At very first, you want to identify, so you want to start with a long list of all possible climate risks and then use sort of a mix of industry insights and stakeholder engagement to shortlist the issues that are most likely to affect you in your supply chain. As a next step, you can assess, so you can use climate scenario data to assess how each risk or opportunity will change across different scenarios and time horizons. And this helps you to understand your potential hotspots for deeper assessment. You can then take the short list of high risk and opportunities issues that you've assessed and quantify potential future business impacts, including those stemming from higher costs or lower revenue, changed asset values, access to capital, and so on. And once you've done this quantification, the next step would then be to actually manage these. You've got a good understanding, and now you want to identify ways to adapt your business to mitigate the most likely and impactful risks and take advantage of the biggest opportunities. So you put in place metrics to ensure that mitigation measures are being put in place. And at this stage, I would like to hand over back to Matt.
Great. Thanks, Louisa. Hopefully everybody took some key takeaways there, and we'll come on to summarizing some of those points later on. But for now, I'd like to introduce Miss Ivon Flores from JG Summit, where we've got a bit of a casual Q&A session to run through some of the work that JG Summit have been doing around their supply chain and their climate risks. So welcome, Ivon. Do you want to give us a quick introduction to yourself and your role?
Hi, Matt. Hi, everyone. Can you hear me well?
We can.
I checked. All right. Ivon Flores here. I am Head of Sustainability and CSR for JG Summit Holdings Inc. Um, uh, and so, shall I give an overview of the company as well, Matt?
Yeah, that'd be great if you could give us an overview of the company, the supply chain, and really how complex your supply chain is and the different business units and what got you interested in supply chain risk assessments.
All right. So, JG Summit Holdings is one of the largest and most diversified conglomerates in the Philippines. Our business units span various industries, including food and beverage, that is the Universal Robina Corporation, air transportation, that's Cebu Pacific, one of the largest here in the Philippines, real estate and property development, which is Robinson's Land, and our petrochemicals company, JG Summit Olefins. But we also have an affiliate, which is Robinson's Retail Holdings, which is one of the Philippines' largest multi-format retailers. Over the years, RHI has developed a broad and diverse portfolio that includes supermarkets, drugstores, department stores, do-it-yourself stores, convenience stores, appliances, toys, mass merchandise, beauty, and pet retail. You could imagine RHI operating 2,300 stores across the Philippines and more than 2,100 franchise community drugstores under the generics pharmacy brand. So, with that, those businesses in the Philippines, our supply chain is highly complex, involving multiple suppliers and partners across different regions and industries. Understanding our supply chain risks is crucial to ensure the resilience and sustainability of our operations, especially in the face of global challenges such as climate change and geopolitical tensions. That's
Great.
it,
That
Matt.
sounds very complicated, and I know we work with a couple of those business units, so understanding the variety and the diversity is critical. Maybe you could just start off by explaining what steps you took to start learning about supply chain risks. What was the capacity building that your team embarked on? What did the business units already know, and what were those initial first steps?
Yeah. So we took very foundational steps, Matt, in understanding the risks that we were managing. Um, so first things first, in 2021, we had looked at integrated enterprise risk management process. What that means was to look at how we can integrate sustainability risks into our ERM. Very foundational, but we had to do it because it was it was a first step. Okay. Fast forward to 2023, we focused on understanding the resilience of our key assets against climate hazards such as typhoons, flooding, sea level rise, and extreme heat. We also conducted a detailed study for key assets to better understand hazard and vulnerability assessment across our portfolio. So to do this, first is we looked at using climate tools for our hazard exposure. In doing that, we were able to understand the top hazards that will impact at least 292 of our facilities. So that's not just JG Summit Holdings, but that's also for Robinson's Retail. Knowing that, what we did was to start um, looking at the top five first facilities because we also wanted to build capability of people doing the vulnerability assessments. And in that, we're able to engage more people internally to learn about that process and be able to scale it afterwards. So we looked at five facilities, worked with people, and came out with the assessments through their help. That's it, man.
Fantastic. Thanks, Yvonne. So there's a lot of different sites, a lot of different risks. What was the major, if you're able to share with us, what was the key
Mm.
risk you identified, or which was the key part of your operations or your supply chain that was looking to face those risks?
So the focus for that project that I mentioned to you was really climate resilience. So if we were looking at physical risk and the impact of the hazards that I mentioned earlier, um, the output of that exercise really was looking at even recalibrating what are mitigating responses, because now we understand more the hazards that may affect the facilities that we chose.
Yeah, great. And how have you found communicating that to your internal stakeholders? What have you found that's worked in terms of reporting to leadership to get them on board?
Yeah. So I think the beauty about the process, Matt, was that the sustainability team was not the one reporting to the bosses. We had operations people who did the assessment. We just enabled them to do the assessment. And so the operations people were communicating to the CEOs, and they're able to recalibrate internally what the approaches are and what are mitigating responses that need to be done and put in place.
Yeah, that's great. So making it real for the people that need to take the action on the ground as well, and not using sustainability as an add-on function
Mm,
is always a good way to go about it.
yes.
What were some of your biggest challenges, or what were some of your biggest wins during that assessment?
Biggest wins, it's engaging those internal folks because we're able to convert to and make people understand where we're heading, right? I think that's the biggest win for that. um, uh, and also, there's a because we engage them and we worked on it together. I think we're able to increase awareness and gain better understanding and appreciation on the impact of climate change to those facilities that we looked at. So really, it's getting more people to our side and see the perspective also from our side, and also marry that with their own perspectives.
Fantastic. Um, so what from the learnings that you've had during the process, if you got to redo it, if you got to go back to the start, what have you learned today that you wish you had done differently or better or faster during the process?
Um, okay, good question. So, what worked for us is um, is allowing other people's perspectives to join us, to be part of the process as well, right? So, what we've done is a bottom up approach, but also marry that with a top down approach on climate resilience. Am I making sense, Matt? When I say bottom up, it's getting the people on the ground to do the assessment. Top down is um, the strategy, the directions in terms of doing the vulnerability assessment. And when you marry that, you're able to give an output, or that then feeds into strategy planning, uh, and also our ERM process. Am I making
Yeah,
sense, Matt?
uh, you're making perfect sense to me, Yvonne. That's really clear. Thank you so much for sharing. Um, I guess we've got a few people on the line today. So just in terms of your final thoughts, and any final recommendations you'd make for people that maybe haven't done that first step, where would you suggest that they start?
I would say uh, start start with really understanding the risks that your team, that your company is facing. So after all, it's really all about managing risks. We need to understand what is in our control, so we can prevent or mitigate the risks. How will climate impact our assets and operations is a key question we ask ourselves. Understanding climate related risks to our supply chain is essential for ensuring the long term resilience and sustainability of our operations. By better understanding these risks, we can develop more effective mitigation strategies, enhance our adaptive capacity, and protect our businesses from potential disruptions. Beyond disclosures, this knowledge allows us to make informed decisions that align with our commitment to sustainability and create shared value for our stakeholders. Thanks, Matt.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Miss Yvonne, for joining us. I know it's late actually on the East Coast of the US, so I appreciate your time joining us today.
Pleasure, Matt.
Great. Well, before we get into the last part where we have some audience questions, just to summarize some of the conversations that we've had today. Thanks, Louise. If you could just jump to the next slide. So we know that everyone's at a different point and has different needs, and making sure that you collaborate with your suppliers and get the best possible data is really, really important. So out of today, where are you going? Where should you get started? And I think Louisa summarized a lot of this as well. And I'll add one from Miss Yvonne that we learned just then. But really understanding the work to date. So scoping your needs, understanding where you are today, setting those clear objectives when you come to identifying either it's climate scenarios, the risk assessment process, are you looking for resilience, and how are you going to report? And then go and collect relevant data. So across your suppliers, across your own operations, where are your assets based? What are your main activities? What are your emissions? Uh, is there any financial data? Go and collect the relevant data and the relevant models. And then we need to assess those risks and identify ways to build resilience and trying to include the financial impact of those risks to put the materiality of the risks into perspective for future strategy and future development and developing that resilience plan. And I think, well, this is the advice from Ivon, but I think a key one here is engaging your stakeholders. So prioritizing internal stakeholders, engaging them early on to understand their needs and what the results they want to see, to be able to make sure that what you deliver is actionable on the ground by the people that need to do it. And the example from JG Summit is getting the operation team to take responsibility and ownership of the climate risk assessment process is a really good example. That crosses boundaries, not just in climate risk, that's relevant to decarbonization strategies, that's relevant to business strategies in general, I think, but making sure that you really engage and work closely with the business and don't just sit as a separate sustainability function throughout this process. Thank you so much, Ivon and Louisa, for running us through that. We do have 3 or 4 minutes for some questions. So we've got a few through the Q&A portal, so we can look at that. But maybe one for you, Louisa. What are some practical measures that can be taken to manage your supply chain risks?
So if you're thinking about your supply chain and you've started on this journey, maybe you're at the stage of identifying, maybe you've already done some assessment or even quantification of your risk opportunities. You have a good understanding of where your risk opportunities are. That is basically where you can take a range of actions. So like you can basically take the steps sort of also that Ivon spoke to a bit, which is integrating these risks and opportunities into your enterprise risk management so that it's fully integrated and can inform your decision making. But you can also diversify your sourcing regions. So that goes to the example of, well, maybe I should diversify where I get my coffee and my cotton from as a raw product. But also the whole point of engaging your suppliers at the right stage and prioritizing which ones to engage at what stage and helping them deal with the risks that might be out of your direct operational control.
Great. And maybe a follow on to that one is, I think these are 2 quite similar questions. So what do you see as the major supply chain risks to APAC? And then the other one is, what upcoming trends do you see in the next 5 to 10 years and how that might impact those risks that suppliers and companies might be facing?
Yeah. So I think the key climate-related risks, supply chain risks in APAC, I mean, most often the companies that we work with have global supply chains, so there are not really these specific risks that are relevant just for our APAC clients. But there are, of course, some climate-related physical risks in the region that are more frequent here than elsewhere, or occur a lot, such as, say, flooding or heat waves, if you're in Australia, bushfires, and others that are less widespread, such as heavy snow. But there is, for instance, issues with heavy snow in Japan, where that has caused disruptions as well. And to what do I see in the next few years in sort of terms of trends? So I do think that both transition risks and physical risks will become more of a topic. There is, of course, the drive from disclosure. So you will need to assess it just in terms of wanting to align with mandatory, also with voluntary disclosure, especially if you are operating also in markets, maybe not in your where you're located with your headquarters, but if you have suppliers or operations in markets that are regulated around disclosure, depending on the size of your company, you might actually have to disclose already. So there will definitely be more of a drive of having to assess these risks from that perspective, but also just generally there will be more transition risks coming up if we are going to transition to a low carbon economy. So understanding these early on and trying to capitalize on the opportunities is definitely a very great option. And physical risks, I mean, we've already seen that they are increasing. They're increasing extreme weather events such as floods and droughts and fires, etc., in the region, and those are only likely to increase in the near future.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, we're at the end of time here, so we're going to have to stop. But thank you again, Louisa and Ivon, for your insights on this really important topic. I'd like to thank all of the South Pole clients on the call for joining us today. And for anyone not familiar with South Pole, we're a carbon project developer and a full service climate consultancy working with our clients globally since 2006. And we partner with clients from crafting decarbonisation and climate risk strategies, implementing climate action, understanding nature impacts, and also unlocking finances. I'd like to thank you all again for joining us and extend the invite to join us on the 22nd of September, where we will discuss measuring supply chain emissions with accuracy, and on the 29th of September, where we will focus on decarbonising and engaging stakeholders. So I look forward to seeing you all in those two sessions. And again, thank you for your time today and have a good rest of the day.